They could have stopped it. 12 legions of angels were watching. And every one of them could have stopped it. That is the part the world never understood. Not that it happened, but that they let it happen. That they stood in their thousands above Jerusalem, ancient, powerful, beings of fire and light who had shattered armies and split seas and stood at the edges of creation since before the first human word was spoken, and they watched. And they did not move. The one who stood closest was named Seraphiel. He had been with him since Gethsemane. Since the garden, since the moment he had watched him press his face into the earth and pray with a desperation that Seraphiel had never heard from him before and never wanted to hear again. Since the shaking hands and the sweat and the 3 prayers that all asked the same question and received the same silence. In the garden, Seraphiel had been given a task. Strengthen him. He had gone to him in the dark between the olive trees, had come close, closer than the order of things usually permitted, and done what he had been sent to do. He had felt him tremble. He had felt the full weight of what was being carried in that human body, in those human hands, and he had given what he could give. Strength. Not relief. Not rescue. Not the removal of what was coming. Just enough to stand up. Enough to walk back to the sleeping disciples. Enough to face Judas at the garden gate. Seraphiel had watched him walk back through the trees. Steady. And he had thought, in the way that angels think, complete, immediate, without the slow assembly of human thought, he is going to do this. He had known it before. But knowing and watching are not the same thing. He had followed every step since the arrest, the trials, the long night of torch-lit rooms where men asked questions they had already decided the answers to. He had followed the road from the city to the hill outside it, step by step, and the host had gathered around him as he walked, drawn by what was happening, the way all things are drawn toward the center of something that has never happened before. Thousands of them. Then more. Arranged above Jerusalem in a silence that had no precedent. Because nothing like this had ever happened. And nothing like this would ever happen again. The first nail was the moment Seraphiel almost broke. The sound of it went through him like lightning through stone, sharp, irreversible, the sound of something that cannot be undone. He moved. One step. Past the boundary. And 2 of the host caught him. Not violently. Not with force. Just hands on his arms, on both sides, the grip of beings who understood what he was feeling because they felt it too and were holding themselves still only by the same effort that he was failing to manage. Seraphiel. His name. Spoken quietly. He stopped. He looked at the hands on his arms. He looked at the hill. His entire existence, every moment of every age since he had been called into being, had been oriented toward the protection of what was holy. It was not a rule he followed. It was what he was. The way water is not following a rule when it flows downward. And what was happening on that hill was the holiest thing that had ever happened. And he was being asked to watch it. I can stop this, he thought. The thought arrived complete and fully formed. One word. One step past that line. And it stops. He felt the others feel what he was thinking. He felt the host lean, not physically, but in the way that thousands of beings oriented toward the same impulse lean toward the boundary. Waiting. Every one of them waiting. Say it, the impulse said. Say the word. Move. You were made for this. This is exactly what you were made for. The hands on his arms tightened slightly. Not to restrain him. To be with him. In what he was about to choose not to do. Seraphiel stood at the boundary. He looked at the cross. He looked at the face he knew. And he understood not for the first time, but more fully than ever before, more fully than he had been able to understand it in the garden or in the trials or on the road, what would be lost if he moved. Not the plan. Not the order. Something more specific. Every person who would ever stand in the dark and feel abandoned and cry out into silence, they would lose the knowledge that he had been there too. That he had cried the same thing. That the silence they were crying into was not empty. If Seraphiel stepped forward, that would be gone. He stepped back. The hands released him. The host was still. The hours passed. At midday the sky changed. Darkness rolled across Jerusalem from every horizon simultaneously, the kind of darkness that has nothing to do with weather, that the body recognizes as wrong before the mind has processed it, that makes animals go quiet and crowds look up. The crowd went quiet. The soldiers looked up. Seraphiel felt what moved through the darkness. Not anger. Not power. Grief. The grief of the whole of creation, everything that had been spoken into existence, watching what was happening to the one who had spoken it. The rocks and the earth and the torn sky feeling what the people below mostly could not feel, could not name, could not recognize for what it was. The veil in the temple, Seraphiel knew this, felt it was already beginning to strain. Near the end, the voice came. A single cry. My God, why have you forsaken me? The host went absolutely still. Because these were ancient words. Words spoken by a human voice centuries before, from inside genuine abandonment and genuine darkness and genuine despair. Words that had been used by every person since who had ever felt what those words described. He was saying them now. From inside the fullest possible experience of what they meant. Not performing them. Living them, and Seraphiel understood, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives complete, sudden, rearranging everything around it, that this was not defeat. This was solidarity. He was stepping into every human darkness that had ever produced those words. He was taking them into himself, every person who had ever cried them in the night, alone, with no answer, with the silence pressing in and making them his own. I was here too. In this dark. I said these words. You are not alone in this. Seraphiel stood in the afternoon darkness and felt the full weight of what he was witnessing. And wept. Not with water. With everything he was. The moment came. One final breath. One final word. It is finished. And then stillness. The stillness that follows completion. Not the stillness of absence, but the stillness of something accomplished. Then the boundary dissolved. Not by force. Not by decision. The reason for it ended when the thing was finished, and when the reason ended, the boundary ended with it. Seraphiel moved. He was not the first through. He was part of a movement so vast that individual motion ceased to be distinct, the host coming through the boundary like a river through a broken dam, like light through a window that has been shut for too long, and the world receiving them with everything it had. The earth shook. The stones split. The curtain in the temple tore from top to bottom. Not the direction men tear things. The direction something tears when the reason for it no longer exists. Seraphiel did not go to the cross. He went to the ones at the foot of it. The women. The young man. The ones who had stayed when the others ran. He could not speak to them. Not here, not yet. But he stood near them. And let what he was, what all of them were, be present in the only way it could be present. Not visible. Not announced. Just warmth. In the dark. Near them. So they were not entirely alone. 3 days later Seraphiel stood at the entrance of a tomb. He had asked for this task. He had stood at the boundary for 6 hours on that hill and chosen, again and again, not to move, and when it was over he had asked for one thing. Let me be there at the beginning of what comes next. He rolled the stone. Not to let him out. He was already out. To let them in. To let the women see. To let the world begin to understand what had happened, not the ending, which was what it had looked like, but the thing underneath the ending, the thing the ending had always been carrying inside it. The morning light came through the entrance. The tomb was empty. The cloth was folded. Seraphiel stood in the light of the first resurrection morning and thought about the crowd on the hill. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. He looked at the empty tomb. He didn't come down. He thought about the cry in the darkness. The solidarity. The weight of every human abandonment taken into those hands and carried through death itself. He went further, down into the darkest dark. Into the place where there is no light and no voice and no answer. He went there. And he came back. So that no one who goes there goes alone. Seraphiel stood in the entrance of the empty tomb as the sun rose over Jerusalem. Behind him, the world was waking up. It did not yet know what it was waking up into. It would find out.